The wind howled like a wild animal outside the cabin walls, rattling the old wooden window panes and coating everything in a sheet of relentless snow. Harper Reed stirred the thick stew on the stove with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. Power had gone out nearly 2 hours ago, and though her backup generator coughed to life briefly, it had sputtered back into silence just as quickly. She didn't mind. Life on the edge of Black Hollow Ridge had taught her to adapt. What she didn't expect was the pounding at her door. 3 hard knocks, her heart jumped. No one just showed up in a blizzard, not out here. Cautiously, she reached for the old rifle leaning against the doorframe, more for comfort than anything else. Then came the second knock, louder this time, urgent. She opened the door slightly, and wind rushed in like a punch. But it wasn't the wind that took her breath away. It was the man, barely standing, covered in frost and blood, lips blue, face pale. He swayed once, then collapsed into her arms, and just like that, Harper's quiet life was shattered. Harper barely had time to react before the man's weight pulled her forward. Her knees buckled slightly as she struggled to keep him from hitting the floor, her boots slipping against the icy threshold. Snow blew in behind him in a wild, blinding rush, but she couldn't worry about that now. "Gatto, okay," she muttered, dragging his freezing body over the wooden floorboards with all the strength she had, her arms strained, her heart racing. "You picked the worst night to die on my porch, stranger." The man was unconscious but breathing, shallow, erratic gasps. His face was pale and dusted in frost, the stubble on his jaw coated with a thin layer of snow. His coat, which looked more suited for fashion than function, was soaked through, and his hands, Harper gasped. His fingers were nearly white with frostbite. She pulled him closer to the hearth where the fire still roared, barely clinging to life after an hour of neglect. She grabbed a pile of thick blankets from the storage bench by the wall and wrapped them tightly around his body. She didn't dare remove his wet clothes yet, not until she warmed his core. His lips moved slightly. A word, maybe. Harper bent low, her ear nearly to his mouth. "Help," he whispered hoarsely. "You've got it," she answered, surprised by the tremor in her own voice. "But you've got to stay with me, okay? You go dying in my living room, and I'll never forgive you." She rushed to the kitchen and filled a pot with water, setting it on the stove to boil. Her fingers trembled as she opened her emergency medical kit, pulling out hand warmers, a thermometer, a blood pressure cuff. She wasn't a doctor, not even close, but growing up in the mountain woods had taught her how to keep someone alive until help came. If help could come tonight. She looked at her phone, no signal, no bars. The storm had knocked out the nearest cell tower last year, and the replacement was still under review by the town board. The landline was dead too. Likely the power lines were down, and the backup generator had finally given up after years of patchwork maintenance. She was alone, just her and the unconscious stranger. Harper gently pressed a warm towel against his forehead, noticing the strong line of his jaw, the expensive watch barely clinging to his wrist, the cufflinks that glinted faintly in the firelight. What the hell was a man like this doing alone in a snowstorm? The stranger didn't wake that night. Harper stayed up, trading shifts between tending to the fire, checking his pulse, and rotating the warm compresses on his hands and feet to avoid permanent tissue damage. His temperature had climbed slowly from a frightening 91, 4 degrees F to a more survivable 94, 7 degrees F by dawn, still too low but stable. By sunrise, the worst of the storm had passed, leaving the forest under a heavy blanket of snow that muffled all sound. The world outside was still and breathtaking. Harper, however, was anything but calm. She sat on a stool, staring at the man's face as he slept. His breathing had steadied. His cheeks were no longer ghostly white. Still, he hadn't woken, and that bothered her. She worried about a head injury, internal bleeding, something she couldn't see or treat. Then, without warning, his eyes opened. They were ice blue, sharp and alert, even if fogged by confusion. "You're awake?" She breathed, setting aside the towel she'd been folding. He blinked at her, lips parting slightly. Where? You're in my cabin, outside Black Hollow Ridge. She poured a cup of lukewarm water and handed it to him. Drink slow. He took it shakily, his hands trembling as he raised the cup. She had to help him steady it. I found you nearly frozen on my porch last night. You collapsed before I could even ask your name. Illy? He croaked. She blinked. Illy Ashford. The name was familiar, uncomfortably so. Harper tilted her head, staring at him more closely. The suit beneath the blankets, the watch, the perfect haircut, now limp with meltwater, all of it clicked. Wait, she said slowly, suspiciously. You're not the Illy Ashford, are you? He frowned slightly. Depends on what that means to you. She narrowed her eyes. The Ashford Group. You own about half the damn skyline in Oak Ridge City, and you're worth more than some countries. His expression didn't change. Then yes, I guess I am that Illy Ashford. Harper sat back, stunned. What the hell are you doing out here? Illy explained as much as he could remember. A meeting had been cancelled. He'd decided on a whim to drive north to scout some private land that had caught his attention. He'd taken a short, cut his GPS suggested, a narrow pass through the mountains. His driver had protested. Illy had insisted. Then the storm hit. He didn't remember much after that. The road had vanished beneath the snow. There was a crash. His SUV had gone off the road and he'd climbed out looking for help. That was it. You're lucky you didn't die, Harper said, handing him a bowl of reheated stew once he'd regained enough strength to sit up. I thought I might. He admitted, his voice quiet. There was something raw behind his eyes, not just fear, but shock. The kind of disorientation that came with realizing you weren't untouchable. Harper had seen it once before, when her brother nearly drowned in the river they used to swim in every summer. That moment when someone first truly meets death. She saw it in Illy's eyes now. I owe you my life, he said after a long pause. I'd say so, Harper replied, lifting one brow and maybe some answers. He chuckled faintly, then winced. Deal, what do you want to know? Start with what someone like you is doing out here alone with no driver and no idea how to survive in a storm. Illy leaned back, gazing into the fireplace. I think I was trying to escape. From what? Money, power, private jets? From being Illy Ashford, he said finally. That surprised her. He continued, when you're at the top, you stop being a person. You become a brand, an asset. Everything you say or do gets dissected, monetized, weaponized. I just needed to disappear for a while. Harper wasn't sure whether to believe him, but he sounded sincere and scared. Well, she said after a beat, you definitely disappeared. Welcome to the middle of nowhere. The next 3 days passed slowly. The roads remained impassable. No help came. Harper's snowmobile wouldn't start, and the radio said rescue teams were prioritizing more populated areas first. That left them stuck together. Harper had never been fond of strangers. She lived alone for a reason. People were complicated, and she'd spent years escaping a past full of loss and betrayal. But Illy, for all his wealth and mystery, was surprisingly human. He didn't complain. He helped where he could. He asked about her life with genuine curiosity, and most shockingly he listened. He helped chop wood despite clearly never having used an axe before. He washed dishes after dinner. One night, Harper caught him sketching something in her notebook. When she peeked, it wasn't business plans. It was a sketch of her dog, an old retriever named Boone who'd passed away last winter. You saw the picture on the fridge. She guessed. He smiled. He looked like a good boy. Harper couldn't believe this was Illy Ashford, the man who once shut down a public library to build luxury condos, the man whose company outbid a children's hospital for downtown real estate. That man was supposed to be ruthless. This man made tea and cried when her generator finally died for good. Maybe the cold stripped away more than just layers of clothes. Maybe it stripped ego too, and that was when she started to fear something unexpected, that she was beginning to like him. Really like him, and that meant only one thing: heartbreak was coming, because men like Illy didn't stay, especially not for women like her. The snow didn't let up for 2 more days. By the time the county plows finally cleared the main road, Harper had gotten used to the rhythm of sharing her space with a billionaire. Not that she ever thought those words would describe her life. Each morning, Illy would wake before her and start the fire, even though he fumbled with the matches like a city kid on his first camping trip. He'd insist on doing breakfast dishes, which Harper normally left in the sink until later, and he'd ask her questions with the kind of interest that made her uncomfortable at first, but then strangely seen. They talked about small things: weather, books, coffee, music, and then, slowly, about real things. She told him about her mom, who had passed 5 years ago from cancer, about the years she spent as a nurse in a big city hospital, until burnout and grief drove her into the woods, about buying this cabin with the last of her savings, about wanting something quiet and real. Illy listened the way no one had listened to her in years, and when he opened up, it stunned her. "My father didn't speak to me for 2 years after I dropped out of business school," he confessed one night as they sat by the fireplace. "I built Ashford Holdings with 2 credit cards and an empty warehouse. I swore I'd make enough money to buy the world, and I almost did." She looked at him over her mug. "And was it worth it?" He stared into the flames. "Depends on the day, depends on how alone I feel." Something in his voice made Harper's chest tighten. Illy Ashford, the billionaire, the mogul, the untouchable man who, 5 days ago, nearly froze to death on her porch. Now sitting cross-legged on her old rug, barefoot and wearing one of her flannel shirts because his luxury suit had gone moldy in a laundry basket. It was impossible, absurd, and yet, here they were. On the 6th day, Harper's landline crackled back to life, a shaky connection, but enough to call into town. They sent a trucks, low, clunky, and heavily chained, to pick up Illy and take him to the local clinic for a full checkup. Harper offered to drive him herself, but he shook his head. "You've done more than enough already." "You sure?" she asked. "I'll come back," he said, glancing at the walls of her cabin, at the fire, at her. It wasn't flirtation, it was a promise, and that made her heart stutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. Harper thought that would be the end, a sweet, weird blip in her quiet life, a once-in-a-lifetime encounter with a man from another world. She never expected what came next. The following morning, while Harper was feeding her chickens and brushing snow off the roof's edge, she heard the unmistakable whir of helicopter blades, not far, right over the ridge. She ducked instinctively. Not many helicopters flew out here, and certainly none hovered just above her property line. Then 2 black SUVs crunched up the snow-packed trail. "What in the actual hell?" she muttered, rushing to the front porch. From the lead SUV, a man in a tailored coat stepped out. He looked like money, hair like sculpted marble, shoes that had never touched dirt until today, bodyguards behind him, but Harper didn't care about any of that. Because the man who stepped out behind him was Illy, clean, shaven, in a fresh wool coat, standing tall again, powerful, poised, and nothing like the man who made tea in her kitchen 2 days ago. Harper crossed her arms, cold wind biting at her cheeks. "Well, you sure know how to make an entrance." Illy grinned, that same boyish grin she'd seen by the fire. "Told you I'd come back." She should have felt warmth, giddy, flattered, but she didn't, not yet, because she noticed the other man watching her, and the way Illy's eyes shifted, just for a second, before he introduced them. "Harper, this is Victor Lang, my chief legal officer." Harper's smile dropped. Victor reached out a gloved hand. "Miss Reed, a pleasure. Mr. Ashford speaks highly of you." Oh no, her stomach sank. This wasn't a casual visit, this was business. Inside the cabin, Harper made coffee while Illy paced. Victor stood quietly, taking mental notes. The bodyguards waited outside, dark shapes through the frosted windows. "This place," Illy said, stopping in front of the fireplace, "it's not just a cabin, it's something else." Harper raised a brow. "Careful, that almost sounded poetic." He turned to her. "I want to buy it." Her hand froze on the mug. "I'm sorry, what?" "Not the cabin," he said quickly. "The land, the entire region, these woods, Black Hollow Ridge. My company's been looking into a resort development, eco-luxury, off-grid appeal, private trails. It's exactly what high-end clients want." Harper stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You're joking." "I'm not," he said gently, "but I want to do it differently, not like before. I want you involved. You know this land. You know what makes it beautiful. I don't want to ruin that." Harper put down the mug hard. "So let me get this straight. You nearly die out here. I save your life, and you come back to buy it." Illy flinched. "It's not like that, isn't it?" she snapped. "This cabin, these woods, this whole ridge, it's not a commodity to me, Illy. It's my home." Victor cleared his throat. "Mr. Ashford, perhaps we should know," Illy interrupted. "She's right. This wasn't the way to do it." Harper took a deep breath. "You really thought I'd be impressed? That you could charm me for a week and then slap a price tag on my life?" "That's not what Harper, listen to me," Illy said. "I came back because of you. Yes, the land has potential, but so do you. You could lead this, be a partner, design it the right way, protect what matters. You don't have to sell. You could help shape it." Her throat tightened. And damn him, she wanted to believe him. But she'd been used before, by someone who said all the right things. Later that night, after Illy and his entourage left, Harper sat alone by the fireplace again, listening to the wind howl through the trees. Her heart was torn. Illy had changed, she felt that, but the old Illy, the empire builder, was still there too, and she didn't know which version would show up next, and worse. She was starting to realize just how much it hurt to watch him walk away. 3 days passed. Harper hadn't heard a word from Illy since the day he returned with lawyers and big ideas. No texts, no emails, no "I'm sorry," nothing. She didn't know what stung more, the offer to partner on the development of her home, or the silence that followed when she pushed back. She'd replayed it all in her mind 100 times. The look in his eyes, the guilt, the hesitation, the intention. He hadn't come to manipulate her. That much she believed. But he'd still walked into her world like he had a right to fix it. And now she sat on her front porch with a cup of cold coffee, her fingers numb despite the gloves, wondering why she missed him, and why her heart felt just a little heavier each morning. Then, on the 4th night, just after dusk, she saw the headlights, a single vehicle, tires crunching snow, slowly climbing the ridge trail. Not a black SUV, not a luxury truck, a dusty, dented Jeep. Harper stood, heart thudding against her ribs as the engine cut. The driver's door opened. Illy stepped out. No coat, no entourage, just jeans, boots, and a wool sweater. And eyes full of something close to regret. "I left Victor in the city," he said before she could speak. Harper crossed her arms. "What, no contracts this time?" "No." He looked around, breathing in the night air. "No briefcases, no plans, just me." She stared at him, expression unreadable. "Why are you here, Illy?" He walked closer, carefully, like he was approaching a wild animal. "Because I need to apologize, properly, without the suits, without the offers, just as me." She didn't answer, just waited. "I wasn't trying to buy you or this place, but I see now how it looked." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You changed something in me, Harper, and I panicked. I fell back into what I know: negotiating, owning, controlling." He met her eyes. "But I don't want to own this place. I want to understand it, you, what matters here. Why this cabin feels more like home than my penthouse ever did." Still she said nothing, so he went on. "I've shut out so much of life chasing things that never filled the hole. But you made me feel something again, something real." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "What's that?" He handed it to her. "It's the original land title proposal. I tore it up. That's all that's left." Harper slowly unfolded it, just a shredded corner, the Ashford Group logo barely visible. She looked at it, then at him, and then she laughed, soft at first, then real. "I never thought I'd see a billionaire rip up a contract for me." Illy smiled. It felt good, actually. Harper's face softened. "I'm still mad at you. I deserve that. But I missed you too," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer. "Then let me make this right. No deals, no pressure, just me showing up as often as you'll let me." That night, they sat together on the porch in silence, watching the moon rise over the snow-covered ridge. No grand gestures, just shared space and a promise of something more, something real. 2 weeks later, the world came knocking again. Harper knew something was wrong the moment Illy stepped out of his Jeep that afternoon. His shoulders tight, eyes clouded, phone gripped in one hand like it was part of his body again. That alone was a red flag. He hadn't so much as checked his phone during his last 2 visits. No calls, no deals, just books, late night conversations, and bad attempts at chopping firewood. But this was different. "You okay?" she asked, wiping her hands on her jeans as she met him in the driveway. Illy opened his mouth to answer, then hesitated. "The board just called an emergency meeting," he finally said. "My absence has started raising questions." She crossed her arms. "Let me guess. They're not thrilled you've spent more time here than in the city. They think I've lost my edge?" He offered a wry smile. "That I've gone off course. Have you?" Illy looked past her, toward the ridge where pine trees stood like silent sentinels. "Maybe, but it's the first time I've felt right in years." Her chest tightened. She hated how much she wanted to believe him, how much she wanted to protect what they'd started building. Quietly, tentatively, in long walks and clumsy jokes and shared silence. "I have to go back," he said. "At least for a little while. Make sure they don't try to gut the company while I'm not looking." Harper nodded slowly. "I figured this day would come." "It's not goodbye," he said quickly. "I'll be back before you know it." But something in his voice wavered. "Not much, just enough," Harper smiled. Small, sad. "You don't have to make promises you can't keep." He reached for her hand. "I'm not like that anymore." "I want to believe that," she whispered. "Then do." He leaned down and kissed her. Slow, warm, full of hesitation and longing and something unspoken that tasted dangerously like love. Illy returned to Oakridge the next morning. Within hours, headlines began to roll. Ashford Group in turmoil. Billionaire CEO returns amid rumors of internal power struggle. Illy Ashford Mia for weeks. Is the empire falling apart? Blood in the boardroom. Is the King of Steel losing his crown? Harper read them all, even though she told herself not to. She didn't need to know. She didn't want to know, but she couldn't help it. She searched his name every morning, every night, waiting for a sign that he was okay, that he hadn't disappeared forever, that what they shared hadn't vanished into the smoke of his old life. Illy stood before the boardroom windows, arms folded behind his back, while 12 men and women in suits stared at him like wolves circling a wounded deer. "I know you're all concerned," he began, calm and measured, "and I'm here to assure you I haven't lost my mind." There was a faint chuckle from someone near the end of the table. Illy didn't look to see who. "I've spent the last few weeks reconnecting with what matters, seeing firsthand how our developments affect real people, real communities, and I've come to a decision." He turned to face them fully. "We're changing direction." Murmurs erupted. "We're restructuring our Alpine Ridge project to prioritize sustainability, community partnerships, and long-term value over short-term profit." Now the murmurs turned to raised voices. "You're kidding. That drops our margins by. Who even are you anymore?" Illy raised a hand. "I am still the CEO," he said, "and unless you want to challenge that, I suggest we move forward." An older man stood at the end of the table, William Maris, long-time board member, long-time opponent. "You're playing with fire, Illy. Investors will revolt." "Let them," Illy replied coolly. "We'll attract better ones. And if we don't, Illy paused. Then I'll step down. The room went still. You'd give it all up? For the right reasons? Illy's voice didn't flinch. Yes. That night, Harper stood in her kitchen, debating whether or not to call. Her phone buzzed before she could decide. One new voicemail from Illy. She pressed play. Hey, I just came out of the longest boardroom knife fight of my life, but I said what I needed to say. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if I'll still have a company in the morning, but I wanted you to know. Whatever happens, you're the reason I had the courage to fight. There was a pause. I miss the sound of your laugh and your terrible coffee and that ridiculous dog photo on your fridge. She smiled despite herself. I'll be back soon, Harper, if you'll still have me. The line went silent. And for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. The snow had melted early that year. Spring came quicker to Black Hollow Ridge than usual, pushing up tiny green shoots around Harper's cabin and transforming the landscape from bleak white to vivid rebirth. The air carried the scent of thawed earth and pine sap, and the sky, blue, wide, and endless, seemed to watch silently over her days. But Illy hadn't returned, not yet. It had been 19 days since his voicemail. Not that she was counting. Well, maybe she was. She didn't want to admit how much she missed him. The ridiculous way he burned pancakes. The endless curiosity in his voice when he asked about every tree, bird, and back trail on the ridge. The quiet ache in his eyes when he talked about wanting something different, something real. She wanted to believe that Illy Ashford, the man she'd found freezing on her porch, was real. But what if he'd been swallowed by the city again? What if the board forced him out? What if he chose to stay gone? The thoughts twisted like vines around her chest. And then, on the 20th day, Harper got a package. It came by courier, hand-delivered in a navy envelope embossed with silver letters. Harper Reed Personal. She opened it on the front porch, careful not to rip the thick, expensive paper. Inside, a single letter. And an airline ticket to Oak Ridge City, first class, no return flight. Her heart skipped. Then she read the letter. Harper, I know this isn't fair. I promised I'd come back. I said I'd return to the ridge with muddy boots and a bad joke and another crack at your terrible coffee. But things happened fast. The board split. Some backed me, some didn't. Maris tried to force a vote of no confidence. He lost, barely. But I've been fighting for Alpine, for the new direction, for everything we talked about by your fireplace. We're hosting a summit tomorrow, a new kind of Ashford event. I want you to be there, not for PR, not for show, because the future I pitched to those investors, the one with community, built resorts and land stewardship and long-term vision. It started with you. Come see it. Come see me. Illy Harper read the letter 3 times before moving. When she finally packed, she included exactly 2 outfits, 1 notebook, and a flask of strong mountain tea. And then she got on a plane. The city hit her like a wall of glass and noise. Everything shined too bright, moved too fast, smelled too synthetic. But when the black sedan pulled up in front of the Ashford Center, 30 floors of sleek steel and glass in the heart of downtown, she saw him. Standing on the sidewalk, waiting, not behind a desk, not surrounded by bodyguards, just Illy, in jeans, smiling like the first day of spring. You came, he said, stepping forward. I wasn't going to, Harper said honestly. I know, he replied, but I hoped you might. She let him hug her, and she let herself hold on for a little longer than she intended. The summit wasn't what she expected. Gone were the glitzy lights, the catered cocktails, the pointless sales speeches. Instead, Illy stood in front of a crowd of stunned investors and executives and laid out a vision for a new kind of development. No forced displacement of local communities, partnership with regional businesses. A public-private trust for land conservation. Designs based on ecological research, not profit projections. Harper's name listed, right there, as lead advisor on the Bennett Ridge project. She blinked when she saw it. Ellie watched her from the podium, expression unreadable. Was it a gift, a trap, a challenge, or all three? After the presentation, Harper slipped away. She didn't know if she was angry or overwhelmed. Both, maybe. She found him in the rooftop garden, leaning against the railing, watching the skyline. "You listed my name," she said. "I did. You didn't ask me. I know. Why?" He turned. "Because I trust you." That stopped her. "I don't want you to just be inspired by that cabin, Harper," he said. "I want you to shape what comes next. I want to build something that matters, and I can't do it without someone who understands the land. You want me to consult. I want you to lead." Her laugh was soft, disbelieving. "I don't even own a suit." "Perfect," he said. "Neither do trees." She stared at him, at the man who once measured everything in spreadsheets and skyscrapers, now offering her a blueprint drawn in soil and sunlight. "I'm not a CEO." "No," he said. "You're something better." She felt her walls shake, but they didn't fall. Not yet. The rooftop was quiet except for the occasional breeze that rustled through the planter beds lining the edges of the Ashford Center's executive garden. From up here the skyline looked less like steel and more like sculpture. Distant, softened, a horizon of ambition. Harper stood beside Ellie, his offer still echoing in her ears. "You're something better." She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. Instead, she said the one thing clawing at her chest since she stepped off the plane. "Are you really going to change, or are you just hoping I will?" Ellie turned toward her slowly. "I've already changed." "You're still running $1 billion company," she said. "Still surrounded by people who'd rather raise a forest than look at it. Still wearing shoes that cost more than my truck." He smiled faintly. "The shoes are a work in progress." "Ellie," she pressed. "This world, your world, it breaks people like me. It chews us up, turns us into branding, sells us. I won't be your mountain mascot." His face shifted, something like pain tightening in his jaw. "I don't want that," he said softly. "I want you to challenge me, to keep me honest. If this becomes another glossy brochure, campaign you walk, no strings." Harper narrowed her eyes. "What do you get out of this, you?" he said without hesitation. "Or at least, the chance to build a life that could include you." Her breath caught. "That's a big ask." "It's not a demand," he replied. "It's an invitation." He handed her a folder. Inside, revised project plans, hand annotated with her name on nearly every page. Edits she'd suggested in passing weeks ago scribbled in the margins. Sections read, lined, trails preserved, forest buffers expanded, local craftspeople contracted for construction. No greenwashing, no fake sustainability PR, actual structural change. "I thought they'd never approve this," she murmured. "They didn't." Ellie said, "I overrode them." "You'll lose profit." He nodded. "I already lost a few investors." Maris resigned. "Wow, yeah." Harper looked at the plans again, then at him, and for the first time she saw not just the man who'd crashed into her life, but the man who stayed. The man who fought to stay. She walked slowly toward the railing, staring out across the city. "He ever apologize?" she asked suddenly. Ellie blinked. "Who? Your father, for turning you into a weapon instead of a son?" He was quiet for a long time. "No," he said finally, "but I stopped needing it." Harper turned toward him. "You're sure this is what you want?" He nodded. "I want to build something I don't have to be ashamed of. And if I say no, then I'll still build it," he replied. "Because it's the right thing." That was when her defenses cracked, not all the way, but enough to say, "Okay, let's see if this plan of yours can survive a woman with a flannel wardrobe and a fierce hatred for glass skyscrapers." Ellie's grin broke wide across his face. "Is that a yes?" "It's a let's see," she clarified. "I'll take it." He stepped closer. She didn't step back. "I know this doesn't make things simple," he said, "but I don't want simple. I want honest. I want messy. I want you." Harper shook her head, smiling. "You really are terrible at small talk. I learned from the best." And then, because the skyline was watching and the wind was still, and it finally felt like something mattered. He kissed her, no ceremony. No cameras, just a kiss that tasted like promise. The following weeks were a blur. Back at Black Hollow Ridge, Harper found herself leading design meetings with people in suits who had no idea what a winter thaw trail looked like. She sketched trail systems, drew water retention plans, fought for native species conservation zones, pushed back against luxury cabin sprawl, and Illy, he didn't just support her, he backed her. When the new investors questioned the slower return projections, he explained them personally. When a PR firm tried to spin the project as rugged romance, he fired them. When she insisted the Welcome Center be built by local timber workers using sustainable sourcing, he tripled the budget and called it non-negotiable. They were a team. A wild, unlikely team, and one night, back at her cabin with spring rain tapping on the roof and the fire hissing low, Harper found herself curled up on the couch beside him, watching him read through the latest trail survey. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes I still expect you to vanish again." He looked over. "Sometimes I expect myself to," he admitted, "but you haven't." "No," he said, "and I won't." And Harper believed him. For the first time, summer rolled in slowly, like warm syrup spreading across the hills of Black Hollow Ridge. The snowmelt gave way to lush green fields, wildflowers that climbed toward the sun, and birdsong that echoed softly through the trees. For the first time in over a decade, Harper saw a fawn born just beyond her north fence. She took it as a sign. Life was returning, not just to the land, but to her. Her mornings were no longer solitary. Illy had traded skyscraper glass for morning light in her kitchen. Instead of urgent board meetings, his calendar now featured things like riverbank consultation or soil pH lab results. He still returned to the city once a week. Ashford Group was, after all, still $1 billion entity, but he always came back. Every single time, and each return carved a deeper groove in her heart. They weren't perfect. Illy still struggled with silence, sometimes checking his phone too often or catching himself trying to optimize the cabin pantry. Harper had to remind him, gently, sometimes not, that not everything in life could be solved with spreadsheets. "I'm just saying," he argued one morning, eyeing her overcomplicated mug cabinet. "There's no reason the mugs should be this scattered. We could set up a rotation." She rolled her eyes. "Do not project. Manage my ceramics." But there was laughter in her voice. Because he made her laugh, and more than that, he made her feel seen. The Bennett Ridge Project, named in honor of Clara Bennett, the original landowner who homesteaded the ridge in 1874, was moving faster than anyone anticipated. Thanks to Illy's revised funding model, the project's design followed Harper's vision: elevated walking trails that snaked through untouched forest, cabins constructed using reclaimed lumber and stone, and educational centers that taught visitors about sustainable forestry, native species, and indigenous land care practices. Locals were skeptical at first. Most were used to being ignored, outbid, or steamrolled by men like Illy Ashford. But Harper was one of their own, and she made them believe. She brought in high schoolers to build bat houses, let local farmers sell their honey, jam, and wool blankets on site, started monthly listen circles with town elders to gather history, land use memory, and even folklore to incorporate into the design. "It's not just a retreat anymore," she told Illy one night as they sat watching the sun bleed orange over the ridge. "It's a restoration." He nodded. "You're building something that might actually matter in 50 years. She nudged his shoulder. "We are." He shook his head. "You led this, Harper?" "Maybe," she said, then smiled. "But you funded the world's nicest composting toilets. That has to count for something." He groaned. "Don't ever let that become my legacy." She grinned. Too late, and not everything was easy. William Maris, still bitter after his failed boardroom coup, began feeding stories to the press, anonymous leaks, shady op-eds. Ashford has gone soft, luxury with a conscience, or just a PR stunt. The woman behind the ridge is Illy Ashford in over his head. Harper saw the headlines one morning and felt her stomach turn. She didn't care what people said about her, but she cared what it would do to him. Illy read them in silence, sitting at the cabin table with his usual black coffee. When he was done, he folded the newspaper, tossed it aside, and looked at her. They're just scared. Of what? He shrugged. That we're proving them wrong. That day, he issued a public statement. No PR firm. No ghostwriter, just Illy on camera, standing in front of the forest. We're not building a resort. We're repairing a relationship with land, with legacy, with the future. And if that's soft, then the world could use more softness. The video went viral in 24 hours. And that's when the tide turned. A month later, at the ground blessing ceremony, nearly 300 people gathered at Bennett Ridge. Some were contractors, others were old farmers, young schoolchildren, artists, hikers, skeptics, supporters, and more than a few curious reporters. Harper stood at the front, microphone trembling slightly in her hand. She'd written her remarks down, practiced them, but as she looked out over the crowd, at the carved benches, the saplings, the cloth banners made by the town's quilting circle, she folded her note card and spoke from the heart. "This ridge raised me," she said. "It taught me about strength and silence, about listening and letting go. And for a long time, I thought it was all I'd ever need." She glanced back at Illy, standing near the edge of the trees. "And then I met someone who reminded me that growth doesn't always mean more. Sometimes it means deeper and truer and harder and braver." She turned back to the crowd. "This project is our attempt to build that kind of growth, for our children, for the land, for each other." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was warm, like rain on dry soil, and Harper realized she wasn't afraid anymore, not of the city, not of love, not of being seen. That night, back at the cabin, after the guests had left and the forest returned to quiet, Illy pulled a small box from his coat pocket. Harper raised an eyebrow. "If that's an engagement ring, I'm going to throw you into the creek." He laughed, opening the lid. Inside, a compass, antique, brass, engraved with 2 letters, H and E, just in case we get lost again. He said. She stared at it, something catching in her throat. He didn't ask for forever, just a direction. And somehow, that was more romantic than any diamond. She took the compass, held it in her palm, then leaned in and kissed him, and that kiss tasted like home. The Bennett Ridge project officially broke ground in early August. Construction crews, made up almost entirely of local hires, moved with surprising grace. They didn't rip into the land, they worked with it. Small wooden markers lined the edges of protected tree zones. Teams dug shallow foundations by hand where needed, preserving root systems and wetland integrity. No bulldozers, no concrete slabs poured for convenience. And behind it all, Harper stood with her clipboard, sun hat, and ever-growing stack of hand-drawn maps. Illy, meanwhile, split his time between the site and the city. The Ashford group was stable again, reorganized, leaner, and surprisingly cooperative. The board had lost some of its old guard, but the investors who stayed had finally stopped fighting him. Many were even beginning to believe. Still, the commute wore on him. Late, night drives, missed meals. He showed up to Harper's cabin some nights bleary-eyed and silent, needing nothing more than a hot drink and a place to rest his head. One night, while she rubbed his shoulders by the fire, he murmured, "I wish I could slow it all down." "You can," she said gently. He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. That was progress. A few weeks later, Harper received an unexpected email from Ashford Communications. Subject, Invitation, The Future of Sustainable Development, London Global Summit. She opened it, blinking. She read it again. And again. They were inviting her, Harper Reid, ex-Nurse Ridge dweller, unofficial coffee snob, to speak at a global summit on sustainable land use. At first, she thought it was a mistake, but then she saw Illy's name listed among the keynote speakers. He hadn't mentioned it. She forwarded the email to him. "Harper, just got this. Is this for real?" "Illy, 100%. I was going to ask you in person. Didn't want to pressure you, but they want your story, the real one." Her stomach flipped. London, flights, cameras. She hadn't left the country since college. The idea of standing in front of a room full of CEO and researchers made her want to crawl under a blanket. She sent back a one-line response. "Harper, I'll think about it." A few days later, they hiked the East Trail. Just the two of them, backpacks light, a thermos of coffee between them. They walked in silence for a while, the kind Harper liked, companionable, easy. Sunlight filtered through the leaves. The trail curved past a grove of birch trees that still bore her old wooden tags from back when she first mapped the ridge. "London's a big deal," Ellie said eventually. She didn't answer. "You don't have to do it," he added quickly. "I'm not asking, I just thought it might be a moment for you, for us, to show the world what we're trying to build here." Harper took a sip of coffee, then passed the thermos to him. "You think they'll listen to a woman with dirt under her nails and a bad track record with public speaking?" He smiled. "I think you're the only one they should listen to." She watched a hawk circle above the ridge. Then she sighed. "Okay," she said, "but I'm not wearing heels." Harper stood backstage at the summit, heart pounding like a drumline in her chest. Illy stood beside her, straightening his jacket, his voice calm. "You'll do great," he said, taking her hand and squeezing it gently. "I might throw up." "Then do it in the direction of Maris," he whispered with a smirk. "He's seated front row." She snorted, despite herself. And then she was introduced. She walked onto the stage, boots not heels, jeans not a pantsuit. She adjusted the mic, swallowed her nerves, and spoke. "I'm not a developer. I'm not a planner or a politician. I'm a woman who lived on a ridge and watched the seasons teach me more than any textbook ever could. I've seen what happens when land gets treated like property instead of memory, when people bulldoze the roots of a place just to slap their name on a building. But I've also seen what happens when someone decides to stop, listen, care. This project started with survival. A man nearly froze to death on my porch, and now he's one of the few people willing to let the land speak louder than the bottom line. I'm not here to pitch you luxury. I'm here to remind you that when we build with empathy, we don't just save trees. We save ourselves." The applause came slowly, then thunderously, and through the spotlight haze, she found Illy's eyes in the crowd. Proud, steady, hers. That night, in a quiet London hotel, Harper stood on a balcony wrapped in a blanket, watching the rain. Illy joined her, slipping his arms around her waist. "You were incredible," he said into her shoulder. She leaned back against him. "I was terrified. You didn't show it." "I still don't want to live in a city." "Good," he whispered, "because I just had a thought." She looked up at him. What kind of thought? His grin was crooked. "About buying a second cabin near the southern ridge, maybe one with space for chickens and, you know, maybe a dog." Harper blinked. "You want to live here?" Here, he shrugged. "Split time, the world's big, but you're my compass, remember?" She laughed. "God, that was corny." "Yeah," he said, "but it worked." And as the rain softened, Harper realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. They both were, together. By the time the leaves began turning gold and crimson on Black Hollow Ridge, the first cabins of the Bennett Ridge project were complete. Not luxury fortresses, not sprawling villas. They were modest, thoughtful, built with care and humility, pine and cedar wrapped around stone, elevated slightly to protect the forest floor, designed to disappear into the trees, not stand above them. Every cabin had a rainwater system, a solar array, and a back porch pointed at the sunrise. And at the heart of the site stood the Ridgekeeper's Lodge, half community center, half library, half classroom, yes. Harper insisted it could be 3 halves. It housed storytelling nights, conservation talks, sharing events, and more than a few local pies cooling in the wide windowsills. Harper stood outside the lodge one evening, arms crossed over her chest, watching families and hikers arrive for the fall harvest gathering. She wore a wool scarf, her hair messier than usual, and a pen still tucked behind one ear from last-minute planning. Illy appeared at her side, holding 2 mugs of hot cider. "You forgot to eat again," he said, handing her one. "I didn't forget," she replied. "I just postponed." "You do realize that starving during a harvest festival defeats the entire purpose?" Harper smirked. "I'm starting to think you just show up with cider, so I don't yell at you about that hideous spread sheet font you keep using." "Listen," Illy said, mock wounded. "Comic Sans is warm." She nearly choked on the cider. Their laughter drifted into the evening air. Later, as the sun dropped behind the ridge and fairy lights blinked to life above the gathering, Harper took the stage again, this time just a tree stump at the center of the clearing. She wasn't scheduled to speak, but people hushed when she stepped up. She cleared her throat, fingers fidgeting around the rim of her cider mug. "I wasn't planning to say anything tonight," she began. "But I'm looking out at all of you neighbors, travelers, families, kids who helped plant these trees, and I want to say thank you." She paused, scanning the crowd. "Thank you for believing in this place, for trusting that we could build something better, and for showing up over and over again, even when it was hard, even when the path wasn't clear." Her eyes landed on Illy in the front row. "And to the guy who once asked me where to plug in a toaster outside, thank you for showing me that sometimes the wildest ideas end up being the ones that matter most." The crowd chuckled. Harper smiled. "Let's keep showing up, for this ridge and for each other. That's all." Applause rose, warm and real, and for the first time in her life, Harper didn't flinch under the spotlight. The celebration lasted into the night. Bonfires crackled, children ran with sparklers, local musicians played fiddle and acoustic guitar under the stars. Illy danced, badly, with a retired park ranger named Millie, who scolded him affectionately every time he stepped on her foot. Harper watched it all with a swelling in her chest she couldn't name at first, but then she did. Contentment, not the quiet, lonely kind she used to cling to, the full-hearted, loud-laughing kind, the kind built alongside someone else. After the last car rolled down the trail and the stars scattered wide above the cabin, Harper and Illy sat on her front steps, sharing a wool blanket and watching the smoke drift up from the final embers. "I think you found what you were looking for," she said softly. He glanced at her. "What makes you say that?" "Because you've stopped checking your phone every 5 minutes." He smirked. "I still check it every 10. She nudged him with her shoulder. "But, yeah," he said, more serious now. "I think I did." "What was it?" "Stillness," he said. "Belonging. The feeling that if I disappeared tomorrow, I'd have built at least one thing that actually mattered." Harper nodded. "That's a good reason to stay." He looked at her. "I plan to." And this time she didn't doubt it. A few weeks later, the first guests arrived. A couple celebrating their anniversary. A teacher on sabbatical. A single mom with 2 kids who'd never seen a deer outside of a zoo. Harper welcomed each of them personally, walking them down the leaf-littered paths, pointing out trails, handing them hand-drawn maps and jars of honey from the local farm. She watched as they slowed down, as they started noticing the birdsong, the moss, the quiet, and it filled her with a satisfaction deeper than anything she'd ever felt in the city. One afternoon, while she and Illy were hanging wooden trail markers, he stopped suddenly. "What?" she asked, brushing dirt off her hands. He pointed at the edge of the trees. There, standing in the clearing, was a black bear and her cub, just watching, calm, unbothered. Illy didn't move, just whispered, "She trusts us." Harper reached out, slipped her fingers into his. And in that stillness, in that perfect moment between wildness and welcome, she knew they'd done it. They had really done it. Autumn deepened, painting the ridge in fire, golden aspens, scarlet oaks. Crisp wind through dry grass. The land was preparing to rest again, and Harper felt the rhythm of it settling into her bones. She stood one morning with a mug of coffee in hand, gazing out over the trailhead from the porch of her cabin. Fog curled low through the trees. A hawk circled lazily overhead. Behind her, the floor creaked softly as Illy padded out, barefoot and half-asleep. "You're up early," he mumbled. She didn't turn, just smiled. Didn't want to miss the quiet. He leaned on the porch post beside her, rubbing his eyes. "You're part of the quiet now." They sipped in silence for a while, watching a young fox dart across the gravel path. "I used to think peace was something you found," Harper said finally, "out in the woods, away from the noise. It's not. It's something you build," she said, slowly, "like trust, like a home." Illy nodded. "Funny. I spent most of my life building things that made noise." She looked at him. "But now you build things that listen." He smiled, the kind that warmed his whole face. "Only because you taught me how." They didn't need to say more. There would be more challenges ahead, more deadlines, more critics, more small fights over the correct orientation of mugs or where to hang firewood tools. But the foundation was stronger now, not because of money, or marketing, or perfect planning, because it was real, rooted, shared. Months later, when the snow returned and guests lit their first winter fires in the ridge cabins, Harper walked through the snow-covered trails in her heavy boots, map in hand, checking signage, tree health, and erosion markers. At a bench near the overlook, she found a note tucked under a rock. A guest had written, "I've never felt so still in my life. This place gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. Thank you." She folded it, pressed it to her heart, then tucked it into her coat pocket. That night, she read it aloud to Illy as they sat beside the fire. He didn't speak at first. Then, softly, "That's better than any investor report I've ever read." She reached for his hand. "You know," she said, "I used to believe people like you and people like me didn't belong in the same story." Illy's thumb brushed over her knuckles. "Maybe we just needed a different kind of story. Like one that starts with a freezing man on my porch." He laughed. "Best accident of my life." And she laughed too, because it was true. In time, they would build more together, not just cabins and trails, but friendships, partnerships, a life. They would host school groups and conservation seminars. They would teach others how to listen, to build differently, to belong differently. But for now, in the flickering firelight of a quiet cabin, with snow dancing against the windows and the slow rise and fall of the forest breathing outside, they simply sat together. No plans, no scripts, just peace, hard-earned and worth everything.